Thank you for joining us. This is Brave New History. We're back with Gnostic Quran, and we're talking about the Apocryphon of John
Yeah,
and
thank
its
thank you
relationship.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. This is very interesting. Um, I think you're the first person to notice these. Yeah.
Maybe we don't know like Germans or French stuff, but I
Mhm.
doubt so. Maybe recently there are some works, as far as I know, in French coming to the conclusion of that there's some specific Gnostic borrowings, and
Mhm.
I don't recall the name of this female scholar who would do this stuff, but in English maybe I'm the first to do this. And yeah, I would say that Apocryphon of John is one of among the documents from the Nag Hammadi library, so-called, is the one of the closest to the what we call Quranic materials
Yeah.
in some parts. Of course, it's not borrowing the whole stuff, but some mythological structure is very similar. So let's start with the two trees theologies, and I recently published the video on my channel about the similarities between the two trees in Apocryphon and Quran, because both of these texts identified the tree of life with a evil tree, which is fascinating because in later Manichaean tradition, which would be considered the world, like the world religion, which is Gnostic, tree of life is the good tree. But maybe they just borrow it from the New Testament passage of
Mhm.
the Jesus, that you might distinguish that the good fruit comes from the good tree and the bad fruit comes from the bad tree. So it may be not connected at all with the Eden story. But here we are very sure about that the authors of the Apocryphon is either borrow and reinterpret the biblical story, or maybe they held their own material, their
Mhm.
own version of Torah, some apocryphal Old Testament stuff. But in this passage, we can clearly see that there was two trees in Garden of Eden, at least in Masoretic text, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, the tree of knowledge, and the God, which is Yahweh Elohim in that case, prohibited to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And tree of archons is identified with this tree of life in Apocryphon tradition. And the tree of their life they had placed in the midst of the paradise. It's in the last sentence. And there's very bad description of the of that tree, that the fruit of the tree is deadly poisoned, and the beauty of the trees depraved, that the trees are the trees of the godlessness. So it's definitely bad stuff. And here they describe this mystery of their life, and possibly this is just the description of what is meant by the tree of life in the biblical source we have today. As you can see, the root of the tree is bitter and its branches are death. Shadow is hate, deception in its leaves. So it's very, it's mostly comparing this tree with the worldly gains, with the worldly desires. And I think that this exactly tree of archons appears in the Quranic materials, or Arabic Quran, what is called. So we can say, Adam, shall I show you the tree of eternity? And that's important to note, Al-Khalidun or Khalidin, and imperishable dominion, because in Genesis it is exactly the tree of life which is identified with eternity. From the tree of life and eat and live forever. So I think this is a strong connotation we can derive from these two passages. And interesting that deception was the cause of the shaitan to show the tree, and even in the Apocryphon we can see this deception coming out too, and their luxury is deception, and their trees are godlessness. So maybe it's somehow connected with in terms of borrowing, but who knows. So this is about the tree. So quite interesting, because Quran itself mostly, like I would say, there's a anti-worldly sentiment in the Quran, and even the whole idea of the akhirah, or the next life, is very important, even in contemporary Sunni religion. So there's emphasis on the next life rather than this life. Very like Gnostic in a sense of this ascetic Gnostic schools, and possibly this tradition is from exactly schools like that. The next one I wanted to present is the passage from the Apocryphon. It's troubled my eye, and I suddenly point out the dots between the Zoroastrianism and this exact materials. And as you pointed out in the recent discussion we had, that the Pharisee at the start of this Apocryphon, the name of the Pharisee to which the author of the Apocryphon is talking to is the Arimanios. So maybe they already held some Zoroastrian materials on their hand and trying to like reinterpret the mythology, but fate and the doom is the names of the Zorvan. The Zorvan itself in the Middle Persian means the eternal time, or like the higher time, not just ordinary time we have on our clocks, which would be zaman in Middle Persian, and it's still used in Arabic, by the way, this word zaman. Oftentimes you can hear this, akhir zaman, like the last time come, when all of a sudden this apocalyptic senses going on around the society, like it's often used. But yeah, fate changes unpredictably, and fate is stronger than the gods, the authorities, the demons, and the generation of people, meaning that the fate is above the principalities, about the what is called the archons and Gnosticism. So all stems from fate, and it's very Zurvanistic in a sense. So I just wanted to point it out, and at the bottom you even can see, by fate, who is Lord of it all. Silver, that's another interesting passage, and describing the archons, what they brought. The Apocryphon states that they brought into being gold and silver, money and coins. And Quranic passage where the word waraka, which usually identified as the leaves or specific leaves in the garden, but if we drop the harakats or the diacritics on this text, because we can read it as waraka, but we also can read it as warika, and warika in Arabic means the silver. So the passage could be translated differently. So they began to boast about themselves because of the silver of the garden. Maybe somehow connected, but I found this So the next slide, what is described as the Mother Father in the Apocryphon text. The Mother Father is merciful, a Holy Spirit sympathizing with us. And I don't remember the name of the scholar, but he also proposed this idea that Rahman ar-Rahim could mean, where the Muslims uses this in the prayer, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It could mean the Mother Father, because Rahma in Arabic means the womb, meaning the womb of the women, and Rahim could be this kind of counterpart, the male counterpart of the Rahma. And even in the text, the Mother Father is identified with she is the universal womb. She is before everything. She is Mother Father. So I found this connection to be very strong. Maybe it's even connected to the famous Rahmani religion of the Rahmanite religion of Yemenite Jews, but I don't know. And yeah, as you can see, Rahim is fa'il, so it's like this, the strong emphasis, like the most merciful without any comparison. Yeah. And you wanted to ask something?
Yeah. So what's the general interpretation of it with
Rahman Rahim, you mean? Compassionate and merciful. Most scholars will translate it like that, but maybe, maybe. But Rahim is like it's the fa'il. It means the comparison without like it's like the Allahul Kabir and not the Akbar, or Allahul Rahim and not Arham. So it's the word played in a sense, because if there was Arham, not Rahim, that would mean you compare the God to something, which is a very bad thing to do in in Gnosticism, because he's incomparable.
Yeah, which, I mean, perhaps within Gnosticism, that's probably the most common description of the monad, is it's unknowable and without comparison.
Yeah.
And, in Islam, we see that a lot.
Yeah,
the
famous Quranic verse, Laysul kamithlihi shay, that there is nothing compared to him. And who knows what the God used to describe this. So because there's a different description terms in Quran. So there's Allah Rahman Rahim, there's Allah Azizul Hakim, Allah Samiul Basir, and we just assume that this is the same Allah. Like we just assume that Allah means the some descriptive name of the God. So it's not you can't translate Allah, you just state Allah. Whilst most probably Allah just means the definite article al and ilah, meaning the God. So it changes everything in our approach to the Quranic material, but still investigating it in terms of this distinction between this descriptive terms. But I can clearly see that when it comes to the law, to the legislation, the descriptive names Al-Hakim, Al-Aziz would be used, not Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, meaning the judge, and the mighty one, Aziz. So I'm still doing my job in terms of that. Yeah, in the next slide, God the Father, as you can state it without comparison, and he's identified as the light in the Apocryphon. It's utterly perfect light. And Allah, or the God, what kind of God we don't know, is identified with light in the Quran, who is the light of the heavens and the earth, Nurul Samawati wal Ard. And it's a famous verse of light. And another passage which is interesting, the one cannot be seen, for no one can envision it. And there's a very similar passage in the Quran. Vision perceives him not, but he perceives all vision. And there's a whole debate about this verse, by the way, between the Mu'tazila, what is called, and the classical Sunni Ash'ari creeds, where in Ash'arism you can perceive, you can see the face of God in the next life. But for Mu'tazila school, it's impermissible. It's absolutely blasphemous to state that you can see like this essence of God. So the whole, I would say, the similar debate we can see in Catholicism versus the Orthodoxy about the theosis, or the process of God, like attaining the godliness. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in Islam we don't really see a lot of positive description. I mean, outside of like the most compassionate, the most merciful, the all-seeing, right?
Yeah.
But here we see Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
Now, giving like a description like that, you would think is a little taboo, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but I don't. I think that authors haven't meant like the illuminative light in that sense. It's more like how it's in Zoroastrianism, by the way, that this light of wisdom, the Promethea, right, or Sepanta Manyu, the first emanation of the Ahura Mazda. But yeah, and here's he described as Al-Latif Al-Khabir, which is like the very compassionate one. So it's very important for the northern, or for the Sufi tariqas in the Africa. A lot of the dhikr would use this Al-Latif as very oftenly. You can hear it in the like recitation, mantras, as you can call it.
And this verse here, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. And is the next part the one cannot be seen, for no one can envision it? That immediately comes after.
No, it's different. Like it's Surah 6, and I have it in the brackets, and 24. The next verse would be about that his light, he is the light upon light, nur ala nur, and his light is like there's some weird comparison with a like lamp or something. Maybe some apology that his light is not like this luminous light, because they compare it as the light which how is it? Can't recall it right now. The light which is basically mirrored through the mirrors. It's not the sourceative life. It's not the light as the light of the sun. Like almost Mithraic in that sense. Because
exactly. That was exactly my thoughts with Gnosticism. And like, if you're familiar, we might have touched on this before, Dr. Ulansey and Mithraic origins, how I'm personally convinced that Mithraism, we have the precession of the equinoxes, and we have Mithras who's controlling it. Like, so we have the earthly gods that you see in the sky, Zeus, and that, but there's a god outside of it all, right? And that's controlling the precession of the equinox. And outside that, there's a hypercosmic sun, which is a sun like, so we're like a ball, and then we're inside of a ball, right?
Yeah, and he's almost like this, this kind of rebellious spirit which goes against the fate in the sense, because the skies itself and zodiacs would be associated with a fate, which is described in Apocryphon, by the way, and fate would be identical to Zurvan in Mithraism. And at least in Mithraism, Zurvan is negative deity, which is interesting because in Manichaeism it's positive deity. So yeah, and he in this procession of equinoxes it's basically going against the faith and bringing the rebellious light.
Yeah. And
Yes.
just like we have the physical light here, there's something that mirrors it but is far better, right? So
Yes.
once you get beyond that shell that surrounds the earth, there's another kind of light, but it's not like a light that you see. It's something entirely different, right? Where we think about like the light in the pleroma with the monad, it's a
Yeah.
light, but it's like so pure, it's like nothing we've ever seen. And
Yeah.
that kind of matches a little bit what we're describing here.
There was a Russian famous philosopher and esoteric Muslim who called Haydar Jamal. Big fan of his thought, not all of it, because he was pro-ISIS, and which is strange because ISIS is like this almost Talmudic Judaism, and it would be blasphemous to even suggest his ideas. And he actually identified the figure of Iblis with Apollo. And it can be so. And mainstream says that it derives from the Greek diabolos, but why dropping the first two letters? Like you can easily spell it in Arabic like diabolus, but it's not diabolos, it's Iblis, so it can be derived from Apollos, because pa became ba in the p sound became ba in the Arabic, because there's no p sound in Arabic. And and Apollos is identified with the physical light. He's the deity representing the sun. So maybe there's some sort of apology going on, especially like with this comparison with a lamp, but I don't know.
Yeah. That's interesting. Iblis and Apollo.
And as far as I know, even in the Apocalypse of John, there's some. The angel of death is called Apollonius, but it's not called Apollo, and because you can distinguish between Apollo and Apollonius, but maybe some weird stuff. But
That's interesting how they're associated with death, with being the bad guy.
yeah,
But
with the demiurge itself, which is, maybe there was some cults back in the day, and at least we know that in the Aksumite kingdom there was a lot of pagan stuff going on. But
yeah, and it's odd to have like was this guy, he was more mainstream? I mean, outside of the ISIS stuff? No.
he was the friend of the Alexander Dugin. Maybe you know about this guy, but recently he lost his daughter. He was assassinated in Moscow, and he was like this. He held this weird idea, even though he himself identified with orthodoxy, but no way he's an orthodox. He's more of like Gnostic, I would say, like weird type of telema or something like that. And and Haydar Jamal was his teacher, in a sense. He was a pupil with Alexander Dugin himself, were studying with the Haydar Jamal, and they held this secret, not secret society, but like philosophical club during the Soviet Union. And he's not mainstream, but he was connected with the Salafis, and I was like, what the hell is going on? How this almost radical Alevi Shia stuff is connected with the radical Hanbalis. That's weird. for me at least, like, because it's incompatible. Basically, it's like, I don't know. It's like Gnostic would be a pal of the Catholic inquisitors. So it's just, but yeah, he wasn't part of mainstream at all. But he have like Salafi sympathizers, I would say, in Russia itself. Yeah, let's turn the slide. And I don't know, maybe it's connected, but there's in Apocryphon description of several demons creating the types of souls, or what is called the psyche, in the text. And mainstream obviously draw this Quranic passage, which I presented on the slide, with a Galenian type of science, which, by the way, was popular back at the day, but we can derive it from maybe from the Apocryphon, because Alaq, the famous the second verse in the Surah 96, "Khalaqa insana man alaq," created, but khalaqa means to separate, to divide, divided you from the blood, basically blood clot. And there is the psyche of blood in the text, the soul of the blood, separated you from the lump, from this kind of like fleshly piece. Maybe it's somehow connected with a marrow, because I don't know, but there is strong connotation. Bones, flesh, as you can see, there's a flesh soul, there's a bone soul. Skins is not present, by the way, in the Quranic text, but yeah, it's almost like there was some common tradition between the Apocryphon and Quran, where they drive this whole idea how archons created the human physical body. Because as you can see, that when the Quran describing the creation process uses majestic plural, we. So it's not that simple. You must adopt some presupposition that we means that no, that's the sole divinity speaking through the angels, but maybe it's angels themselves. Who knows? Yeah, it's interesting that we covered the bones with the flesh, which is very similar to the Adam speech in the Bible, where the Eve identified with the bones and the flesh. But I don't know. It's very interesting.
That is interesting. That, it's been supposed that Muhammad just came up with this on his own, and just supposing how embryos form.
Yeah.
But here we kind of see that it's
the 7 powers, which is identified with this, like the planets. Gnosticism. But there's no 7 in Quran in that sense. Almost this is the most descriptive ayah about the creation. But there's the 5 elements: cloth, lump, bones, flesh, and there's also like the mudghat is used in the different ayahs describing the creation. So you came up with the 5 elements, not the 7.
So there's no clump, and it seems to start with bone.
Yeah.
Here in the Apocryphon, and then sinew.
Yeah, it's a completely...
And then flesh, and then we go back to the bones and put in the marrow, and then the blood.
Yeah.
And then the skin. But then, there's no skin, right, in the Quran.
In the Quran, and no hairs. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's almost like we're kind of going in reverse a little bit, right? From what the Gnostics say, but you wonder.
But the first 2 steps would be absent. Yeah, it's interesting that atzemot in Hebrew means the soul or the self. It's the metaphor for the self. It's even, as far as I know, in the celebration of independence of Israel, it's called the atzemot, or and some other Hebrew word, because the state itself became self, or the state became the self. It acquired the soul. But I don't know. I myself would be inclined to see the Gnostic tradition, at least what is presented in Apocryphon, as some sort of weird Kabbalism going on. So there's a lot of Jewish stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not entirely Hellenized Gnosticism. It still bears some sort of apologetic, because it's supposed to be apologetical work for interpretation of the Bible. Yeah. And creation of man by the demons is the motive, and Manichaeism too. Just to note that. And famous 19 phrase, and there's a whole Quran only movement which circle around this the number 19, and there's a famous famous ayah or verse in the Quran saying that the hell itself is overseen by 19, and in tradition they identified with the hellish, some demonic deities, and it's exactly what is happening in the Apocryphon. If you, of course, just summarize the two of the type of these demons, which is in that sense, authorities and appearances, 12 authorities and 7 appearances. So it might be connected somehow, but
so that's described in the Quran, the overseers of hell.
Yeah, it's famously identified with what is called Zabaniya in the Surah 96, whereas this creation story, which I presented, also presents خَلَقَ إِنسَانًا مِنْ عَلَقٍ. This is from the Surah 66 or 96, and but I'm not so sure about the Zabaniya. I'm following the German scholar Lüling, who pointed out that Zabaniya may well be the later interpolation of the authors when they added the dot above the Ra letter. So originally it's spelled not the Zabaniya, but Rabbaniya, meaning the forces of the Lord, because Rab in Arabic are the Lord, and there's the whole cosmic battle described in the surah, and obviously it's not compatible, this type of dualism, with a later theology, and they wanted to change that. But that's what I found.
Yeah, and now within the Apocryphon of John, they're not delineated or specifically told that there's 19, but they just go, like there's the 7th, there's the 12th. They give you kind of the executive summary.
There is the 12 authorities, and they describe them, the 12 of them, as Belias. And there's a whole list of these authorities, and there is the 7 appearances.
And what do we mean by appearance here?
Oh, who knows? But they identified with the planets in the text. Most of the sense. And the next step would be like 365 demons who are responsible for creating like the whole body, and that would be like where weird description, a lot of Jewish names for the demons who are responsible for this particular part of the body. Like this demon created your eyeball, this demon created your heart. Like it's a substantial part of the Apocryphon text itself.
Mm-hmm.
And 365 there, obvious connotation with the number days of the year. So.
Gotcha. And then the Quran says 7 appearances.
No, Quran doesn't say. Quran just states that there's 19. So you can derive it only if you assume that, if you like summarize this two into one number, you can get the 19. But
Okay, so the appearances is from the Gnostic text.
yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, and so they sum to 19. And so we're thinking it's like a astrological reference to the
Yeah,
12 houses of the zodiac
and
plus the
7
7 visible
planets.
planets. Yeah.
Yeah, some sort of that.
That is interesting. And that would seem to like be for ancients a mysterious number, the number 19.
Yeah, there's a whole cult around this number nowadays, because he was this guy Rashad Khalifa, and he was like the Quranist, Quran only.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up with the idea that the whole Quran is all about like this. He was obsessed with this number 19.
Yeah. And he was killed, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was exactly killed by the Iranian forces. Like recently, they tried to kill the Salman Rushdie, and but he mostly killed not because he just spilling the beans, but because he declared himself to be a prophet. That's a very dangerous thing to do, especially if you're of Iranian descent.
Yeah, and I think he suggested that some parts of the Quran were out of order.
Yeah, and he actually dropped 2 verses of the Quran because all of his system will crumble if there is like this 2 verses. And I don't exactly recall what the chapter of the Quran where he dropped them, but yeah. And he was like rejected by the most of this kind of Quran only movement, which is basically Protestantism of Islam of today, sola scriptura in a sense. And he hated because of that. Like, oh, how can you reject the dictum of God? It was sparked controversy about his figure, but yeah, I haven't studied his materials. Like, I'm not interested because it's mostly in compliance with the Abbasid theology, which I perceive as much later one. Yeah, and this was the final slide about my presentation. Just made up it recently.
Yeah, so we had talked previously, I don't think it was on air, where when we see the plural, right, Allah talks about himself in the plural, it's harsh, right? And so we could see like maybe it's a melding of like, there's the demiurge and the monad, that there is some tradition that Allah is the good guy, and then some tradition that Allah is the bad guy, right?
Yeah,
and
but some certain aspect of Allah, which I would say. But by the way, Elohim, you can't translate it as the God. It's the gods. So plurality means that there's the plural divinity. Like, it's not the single deity in a sense. Or maybe it's talking about the angels, and even in Ismaili tradition, some Ismaili traditions it's exactly this scenario. As far as I remember, the famous Ismaili Dai and theologian who is Nasir Khosrow. Interesting, he bears the Khosrow name, very like Sassanid. He proposed this idea that when the Quran speaks about the it speaks about this lesser divinity, the demiurge, but in Ismailism is the positive figure, it's not negative. It's almost redemptive figure. He's on the way of ascension, because he would be forgiven on the judgment day.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like with the development of humans, right, from a clot to
Yeah,
bone to whatnot, that he's in the plural there, just as
yeah,
it is with the archons.
yeah.
That you would
Which is,
think, yeah, creating humans isn't that severe or bad, right? But if you think of it as borrowing from Gnostic traditions,
it makes enormous sense
yeah,
from that perspective. And I don't buy all this Galenian stuff because all the Galenian works were translated by the Mu'tazila, this kind of, I won't say Unitarian, but their theology is very similar to the Catholic Thomas Aquinas theology. It's divine simplicity and all of this stuff. And they were responsible for the translation of the Greek works, because most of the Mu'tazili would be the grammarians, like Mubarak, Sibawayhi, many like the titans of the Arab grammarians. They were Mu'tazila. And yeah, this Galenian stuff would be very temptive to insert in the Quran in order to facilitate this kind of Aristotelian theology, because it would be part of the Aristotelianism. That's my idea.
Do you have
About
any guesses at what might be going on here? Is it like you know how we talk about the construction of the Old Testament or even the New Testament, that there's like different like religious ideas kind of coming together, right? Like the retelling of Genesis, we have Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's two different ideas coming together. And then in Daniel there's the Leviathan, right? Which is like a whole different, the Akkadian creation narrative with the whale. And like there, that exists within Islam, but maybe they're just coming from a different source, right? That maybe there's a multiple sources where the Quran
which
is
is
constructed.
still around by the 6th century. I would suggest that most Middle East would be heavily influenced by Gnosticism. Marcionites were still there in Anatolia, and this weird type of paganism, or Yemenite paganism, which stems from the Aksumite kingdom. Everywhere, like this sun and moon, even later on in the coinage, Sasanian coinage. So we just assume that church back at the day held this almost authoritative control over the lands. Definitely, they held this, and that's why there's so little materials we have. They would be destroying this Gnostic materials if it goes against this kind of dictum of the monarch of the day. That's part of the problem. Another part of the problem, that Gnostics tend to be very secretive, and almost all Gnostic materials we can find is from the caves or monasteries, like even Nag Hammadi is found like in some catacombs under the monastery. So that would make another layer of problem. But about the Bible, sure, they would come up with a new ideas, adopting Zoroastrianism, because most of the like this apocalypse materials there, almost retelling of the Gathas, Zoroastrian sacred text, and this apocryphal Old Testament materials we have today. There, we only have due to the help of Manichaeans. Most of them were preserved in Manichaean communities. So yeah, they would come up with these ideas, definitely. And the famous proposal of the even the Russell remarking about the compilation of the Torah, that originally it was Hellenized text translated into Hebrew and compiled in Greek, because the oldest version of the Torah we have, it's in Greek. And that's how the religion works, I guess, that you just came up with a new theology and create the scripture. Like it's not a mad thing to imagine.
Yeah, it would be amazing to see, variant Qurans, and then see which ones they leave in, which parts are omitted and translated differently, to kind of get a feel for the development of it. But
where a little work is done in that field, unfortunately, because mostly of the language barrier and most of the Arabs who are working in this field, they are they are, it's taboo. Yeah. It's not only taboo, but you're not gonna get a big salary if you are doing the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all our only hope is the Europeans who know Arabic and who are not into being the connected with the whoever it might be who spends unimaginable sums of money to promote the Abbasid narrative, which is all around everything which we know about the Muhammad is the 9th century, unfortunately. And and the Hajj itself is a big business, and religion itself is a big business today, and you can't just dismantle it, especially Islam. It could be said less about the Christianity, but it's sad.
Yeah.
But the recent studies of Inara school, I wholly support, because it's revolutionary.
How's that?
Inara school, the critical German school about the origins of Islam. They proposed the idea that Islam originated in the eastern provinces of Iran, in Marv, at least the proto-Quranic materials we have, and they hypothesis that Islam came like this gradually from east to west, and later on adopted in the western parts of Iran and Mesopotamia, and out of that we have all this Muhammad movements, and Muhammad appears in the chronicles in the Mesopotamian region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar, but that's an interesting idea on what parts of the Quran appeared first and how it came to be.
Yeah, that's a whole book, but I don't have it. Like, it's very, very costful. And it's a book of the Luling, and he is trying to reconstruct some parts of the Quran, comparing it to the Syriac hymns, and he actually proposed that many passages in Quran, which is considered to be very rhythmic, that they are actually not that rhythmic, and this rhythm is orchestrated later on, whilst in reality there is no rhythm. That's just a prosaic, in a sense, it just selectively was separated in the later tradition in order to make this old tajweed stuff, like the recitation, specific notes of recitation. And it's connected to the theology, of course, because if you recite a specific it means you giving specific meaning to the Arabic. And the whole this controversy about the ahruf and qira'at, so-called, the modes of recitation, different types of recitation within the Abbasid historiography, how it describes that. There was a lot of struggle about which recitation would be adopted as the orthodox one.
Yeah, very true. That's kind of how variant readings of the Quran are kind of
Yeah,
dismissed. That it's various aruf.
yeah, like the mainstream would say that there are like the 7 readings, but it stems from one of the words. Like it just it was adopted at one point of the history that, yeah, let's agree that there's gonna be a 7 readings. Okay, like there's no more than that. It's already enough. But yeah, even if we compare the 7 readings, they're like it's not big of a difference, right? Whilst if we just open the early Quranic materials, we don't have any recitation written in the written form, which is important. And even the dots, which distinguish different Arabic letters, are not so present. And of course, this is the big problem. Like, why on earth the authors of the Quran haven't put the recitation on the manuscripts? Because we have pre-Islamic Arabic famous manuscript, which is called Perf 558. I don't know, where there is the doting system and the diacriticals. So that's the big question for the Abbasid narrative, which is not still not answered. And yeah,
Yeah, big mystery.
yeah,
All right. So yeah, thank you for that. The Apocryphon of John, Gnosticism, maybe Mithraism as
yeah.
influences in the Quran. It's something we've
Yeah, it's
never
some
really considered.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's some sort of what I call weird mix of extinct Zoroastrian sect and extinct Gnostic sect, and that brings, I think, a lot of problem because they are extinct. We don't have the materials or at least we have, but there were a few materials about this non-Orthodox Zoroastrianism and non-Orthodox forms of Christianity, because obviously this is a specific type of Gnostic tradition. We can just surely say Gnostic, it's just umbrella term in a sense.
Mhm.
Just Valentinianism would be diametrically opposite towards the Manichaeanism, like it would be rivalries, and because Valentinianism is very monistic, whilst
Mhm.
Mani himself taught this substance dualism, like this hardcore dualism. Like there is no room for the Gnostic paradigm, for the Gnostic myth of the demiurge, where demiurge would be just part of emanation process, and that somehow would be blasphemous for the Manichaeans, because God, not directly but indirectly, would be responsible for the evil in the world. Yeah, a lot of mystery stuff about emergence of Islam. We have the coalitions in Armenia which suddenly arose with the advent of Islam, and they were described by the contemporaries as Manichaeans, at least Christian contemporaries. And yeah, we can dismiss that. So yeah, it's certainly some weird connection, and the whole region, I would say Armenia, modern day Azerbaijan, northern Iran, northern Iraq, important. We must unveil what's in there, and there's archaeology going on. Recently, there, almost yesterday, I found on Twitter that they found some sort of a Parthian statue in the northern Iraqi Kurdistan, where he is wearing like the type of clothing which is very similar to what we see in the Chinese sources about the so-called Arabs. Dashi wearing like the Phrygian cap, kaftan, like this non-Bedouin, like it's it's highly distinctive from what we know as Arab clothing.
Mhm.
Oh, but by the way, the Iraqi Kurdistan by that time were ruled by the what is called the Kingdom of Adiobene, and it was the Arabic kingdom. And even in the Persian chronicles, when the Persian speaks about the Arabistan, they don't mean the Hijaz and what is called Arabia Petrea in the Roman sources, which would be like the northern Saudi Arabia and Jordan and South Iraq. It would be this region bordering modern-day Azerbaijan, this Iraqi Kurdistan. And they were ruled by Arabs, and they're in close proximity with Parthian dynasty. So yeah, it must be unwealth, especially Mithraism in its religion. And the process is going on nowadays, at least archaeology doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see. I don't know, maybe there's something to this Mithraic origins of the Quran. Yeah.
But I see it as highly I almost see it like the Nag Hammadi, some sort of a library, but it's very profoundly stitched together. So it's not. It's most likely there were different materials, but they tried to merge it into one narrative, even though you can still sense this distinctiveness between the narratives in Quran, where there's sudden shifts going on. Yeah, highly syncretive. Buddhist elements, undoubtedly. Mithraism, undoubtedly. Manichaeism, undoubtedly. Gnosticism, well, today's stream was about it. So, yeah, it's almost like the beta version of Manichaeism. Like it's like the syncretism in that sense. That's my feelings about the Quran.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. Any final thoughts on it? I mean, that's kind of where we were.
Yeah.
But,
I made up the recent video about that would be the new series,
sure.
Buddhist Quran series, and I published the video about the pork prohibition, so it can be connected with the Buddhism. So watch, enjoy.
Yeah.
So I currently doing the tafsir, what is called the translation from Arabic with the commentaries of Quran. I started this work, so there's gonna be some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, check out the channel Gnostic Quran. Well, yeah, if you're interested in
subscribe to Elliot too.
Yep. Well, but first subscribe to Gnostic Quran, and then if you have time later on, then you can subscribe here. But that's the important thing. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been enlightening. Questions that we didn't even know we had about the Quran.
Yeah. I don't know what we will discuss later on, but I will find out. Maybe we will discuss some Buddhist.
I vote Gospel of Thomas in the Quran.
Oh, could be. Like we can discuss that, but I can see it as in a less proximity to what we know as Quranic materials. But
yeah,
there is some borrowings.
I can see a bit. So that'll be a good cliffhanger.
Yeah. Let's discuss the Gospel of Thomas then next time.
Absolutely. Yep. Sounds good. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Everybody, like, subscribe, comment, and have an awesome rest of the day.
Bye.
Yep. Bye.